There we go.
How
Good
about
morning,
me?
everybody.
How about me, Nicholas?
Yeah. Before we get into class, I'm gonna start peppering everyone for this constantly to the point of you're gonna think that this is gonna be a multi-level marketing pitch. I am still looking for small group leaders. I have 3. I would love 14. You also see the problem with the math. Just to let you know why 14. My guess, we're gonna roughly average. My guess is with the college students and in the fall when everybody's back to a more regular schedule and less vacationing things. My guess is we'll probably average about 280 in here, which is a lot of people, and with 14, that kind of divides up groups, and you say into 20s, because we can all do that math, but I'm looking for just enough to be able to where we don't have groups of 20 adults. I'd like 8 adults, maybe 10 max inside of a group. So I need 14 leaders. So if you have been on the cusp of that and thinking, should I or should I not be a group leader? The answer is you should. Don't hang on that edge anymore. Fall completely into the abyss of small group leader. It's going to be really fun.
And also, too, I think the way small groups are going now, it's not just you have to do the discussion every single week.
No.
It's just making sure, like where people know like where they're going to go, finding somebody in your group who will lead it. We're just going to tag team this thing. I mean, it's a thing to have it on your title, but it's not like,
Well, and for every e-group leader, there's a co-leader, and so they will be helping with all of the things. And even within your group, you'll have people that are better with administrative tasks than you might be, and they will help keep you straight just throughout the year. And it's a lot of scheduling, it's a lot of planning, it's a lot of administrative stuff. It does not have to necessarily mean that you host every week, and it does not mean that you have to be the teacher every single week. So please consider that. We really need at least 11 more by my count. And with that, we will begin our class this morning. We're going to spend one more week kind of dwelling in a place that's less happy, and then next week we're going to get into followership in the family, and that's at least a little brighter spot. But just the pre-warning, we're gonna spend some more time and thought and effort and prayer in situations and topics that are tough to discuss and not necessarily happy per se, but necessary. We wouldn't do this if we thought, we can get away without doing it. But these are important things for us to think on because they're very practical, important matters. For the last few weeks, we talked about who were the people that we talked about?
the week before.
Joseph and Daniel.
Yeah.
Joseph and Daniel. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We've talked about them in their dealings with leadership and how they continued their followership to God and their followership in their earthly citizenship, but at the same time, heavenly citizenship first, earthly citizenship second. And so we're going to keep into that realm, but we're going to skip over to David. And the topic that we're specifically going to talk about to start with is what to do when your leaders are bad. And I think that it's easy to deconstruct things when leaders are bad. It's easy to say, well, they're really bad, and I'm just not going to follow them. I'm just not going to do the thing that we're supposed to do. I heard a quote this last week that said, "You're not allowed to deconstruct something unless you've already constructed something." That was from a movie director, and I thought that's a good rule to live by. Like, don't deconstruct things unless you have already constructed something. Don't complain unless you have an answer, and what do we do with bad leaders? Bless you.
Yes.
That was a good one.
Intense.
So,
Good transition point.
yeah.
No, but really, I mean, I think today too, especially, we are good at deconstructing it because there's so much easy access to throw out your opinion out there, and so all of a sudden it's like this whole bad leadership thing becomes even more blown up because there's more avenues just to throw opinions out there really without any consequence. So yeah, it's a big deal.
Yeah. Where we're going to pick up with David, we're going to talk about David specifically with his relationship to Saul. And Brandon's going to pick up the story right after there's two instances where Saul has been given a task, specifically don't do these things until, or wait for someone else to do them. And what he did is he stepped in and he took them on himself. He did what he was not supposed to do in order to accomplish what he was supposed to do. The first time was a sacrifice. He was supposed to wait for Samuel, and he didn't. He did the sacrifice on his own, and I'm going to come completely blank on the second one, and it doesn't matter. It's chapter 15. It's 1 Samuel chapter 15, if you just want to read that. And so it's the second time that he directly disobeys what he's supposed to do, and then because of that, Samuel says, sorry, buddy, you are no longer God's anointed. Your kingship will end with you, and someone else has already been chosen and been anointed to be your replacement, i.e. David.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So I think in the context when we're talking about a bad leader, and I think we would all agree there's a lot that we have right now in this world. And so I think it's really important to go back and look at Saul. And there's a lot of things that the people of the time, especially the Israelites, would look at Saul and would say, yeah, man, that's my guy right there. Look at him. Like, he is a king. And so I think it's important to go back and look historically a little bit about where we are in the story of 1 Samuel. So the story of 1 Samuel focuses on three main characters, of course. We've got the namesake of the book, Samuel. We've got Saul, and then we've got David. And so in the story of 1 Samuel, we've got this transition where we've got all these tribes that are ruled by judges, the Israelites, and we've got them transitioning into one united kingdom in Jerusalem under King David. And so I'm going to jump to the middle of 1 Samuel. And so we've got the people, they come to Samuel, and they're like, hey, we want a king like all the other nations. Give us one. And so he's like, well, you guys don't need a king. And he gives them all these reasons why they don't need a king. You could go back into slavery. He gives them all these valid things. And they say, no, that's stupid. We want one. So go find one. So Samuel, he's frustrated, and he goes to God, and he's given these reasons of why he's so upset about it. And God says, hey, don't worry. It's you. It's not them. They don't need a king. All the reasons are not valid for having one, but if they really want a king, go find him a king. So it's at this point, Samuel is on his journey to find them a king. And so he finds this tall, handsome, ruddy boy out looking for donkeys. And so he knows where he's going. He sees this guy. And so he talks to Saul, and he says, Saul, I want you can stay with lodging for the night. And then Samuel's a guy, I'd like to say he goes hard in the paint, sports analogy. And so really without any type of the affirmation there for the laugh. And so he just kind of goes cold, and he just gets the oil, and he just like anoints him. He kisses him on the forehead, and Saul's kind of like, what? And so he anoints him right there. And of course, Saul doesn't know everything that this entails. But he is the king that God has chosen to rule them. He's got all the attributes of what they want. And so I think, and this is where we get to this point, I think, is because Saul is the guy that has these things that people looked for in a leader, but these character flaws that he had were just pretty intense.
Yeah, he was the stereotypical king for that area at that time, and so everybody thought this was I mean, like, yeah, this is the guy because he looks just like all the guys.
And so he goes ahead and becomes king, and he has some success at first. He wins some battles. At this time, the Philistines had risen to prominence and were very powerful. The Israelites, in the first part of Samuel, had some problems with them. And so this is the point, though, he kind of starts to go off the rails and starts to get a little in the weeds and a little proud of himself. And so there's a few things that you talked about earlier. The second was a king that he was supposed to kill, he did not kill.
Oh, yeah.
Samuel comes back in and just is pretty upset. I mean, cuts the guy into pieces. And he's like, well, at this point, it's over for you. And so this is the point where Saul, an evil spirit, comes upon Saul. And so he kind of goes mentally insane at this point, just all full of crazy. And so his time is over as far as God being with him at that moment. God has left him. And so Samuel is big time mad at this point. And he's pretty sad too, because God had sent him on this journey, and he found the guy, and he had these big hopes for the anointed one, for the king. But he's also mad at the Israelites too, because the Israelites had wanted this. And he said, you guys don't need this king, even though you wanted one. Here's what happens when you're prideful and you turn away from God. So luckily, though, God has big things going on in the background. A guy named David, just an insignificant shepherd boy that you would not think at all would be the person for this. So God's got things going on the side in the background. So he sends, he says, I need you to buck up, Samuel. I need you to go to Bethlehem. There's a guy named Jesse. I need you to go find him. And so he goes, and of course, Samuel comes into town. Anytime a judge comes into town, everybody gets really nervous because usually not a lot of good comes because he's that they're doing something wrong. And so he comes to meet with Jesse, and he does the whole Cinderella and slipper thing. All the boys, his sons come in, and none of them work out. And of course, he says, there's David. And so at this point, Saul is getting sicker. And Samuel says, all right, David, I want you to go, and you're going to be the personal heart boy for Saul. He's getting crazy, and so you need to help soothe his demons. And so he starts playing music for him and soothing him. He does such a good bang-up job, he becomes a squire. But I think it's wild at the same time. He doesn't know. Like, he's the anointed king, the new anointed one, for the anointed one. I think that's kind of a nice little twist. And so, of course, that starts 16, and that's where the meat of this whole talk. That was just a little background on Saul. So that was chapter 16. 17, of course, we know David and Goliath. I think David and Goliath is kind of cool, too, because if we're talking about pride and stuff, he slays the prideful Goliath just as Saul had fallen with pride as well. And so 18, Saul is getting sicker. David is getting more popular. As it says, the Israelite people, he's a general at this point, and the people are saying, Saul kills his thousands and David kills his 10,000s. And he's also become BFF with Saul's son Jonathan. 19 and 20. So David is winning these battles, and Saul is pretty mad and upset. And so at this point, it's getting pretty rough. And of course, Jonathan, being with one soul, with David, he kind of knows what's going on with this. And so he convinces Saul, he's like, don't kill him. He knows he's probably going to kill him at some point, but he's like, just don't kill him at this time. Because everybody knows, Saul is pretty full of crazy at this point. And so he convinces him not to. Of course, we know at that point, he's playing his harp, and Saul starts unleashing some spears on him. David has like ninja abilities, and he escapes. And so he's on the run.
Very known for his ninja abilities.
Very, exactly. I think it's between the lines there. And so he's heartbroken in enemy territory. This is whenever some Psalms that we read, like 34 and 142, probably come from this period of his life when he's writing these. And so he's on the run. Some things transpire where he goes to some priest, Ahimelech, and Ahimelech gets killed because of this. And because Saul is just so paranoid and panicked. Obviously, he can't kill him himself, and so he has a lot of hitmen up to do this job. Mm-hmm. So He gains 400 men. He leaves his family out to Moab because he's really scared for their lives at this point. And this is whenever Saul really steps up his efforts to really crush David and crush him down. And so this little section here is kind of where the rubber meets the road, where we're going to try to make some applications of how we deal with leaders and how David dealt with Saul in this situation. So at this point, he's on the run. He's got his merry men with him, and they're making their way, and they see the Philistines attacking a grain elevator. I guess not a grain elevator, whatever. A grain storage back then is the closest thing. And so he gets his men, and they go through, and they wipe these guys out. And because of this, though, and remember, he's on the run at the same time. I mean, pretty good guy. Like, he has time while he's being hunted to go ahead and stop an injustice. And so he does this thing, but in the process, he gets ratted out from these Israelites he tried to help. And so Saul learns where he is at this point. And God teaches David a pretty good lesson here at this point. He talks to God, and God says, I am going to let them pursue you now. I'm handing you over at this point to your location and where you are. And he's like, well, but I just what the heck? I stopped these guys. They stopped this injustice. And so at this point, this is the point where we are in a cave. And this is where David is going to come in, and he is going to take a piece of Saul's clothes. So they're deep in this cave, and Saul and his men are making his way, and Saul needs a place to go cover for the night. And so he does, and little does he know that deep in this cave is David and his men. And so his men are like, this is the time, for you to do this. And so he goes, and he's probably tormented at this point a little bit of what he does. What he does, he goes and cuts his cloth.
Can I interject
yes,
something
please.
real quick? So if you are being hunted by someone, he's physically tried to kill you, he has sent numerous groups of people, and you're sleeping in the back of a cave, and you come out and you see sleeping at the front of the cave, that guy. It would be super easy at this point to be like, God has delivered my enemy into my hands to where I can quickly, easily handle this situation. And I think that's one of the takeaways out of this for me was for us, we see situations where it seems like God is just here's your answer. Here, just take this answer. But is that me?
I was the rain.
Is that rain?
I think it was electronics.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh.
No, I think it's this. Look. Okay, I'll
Oh.
be still. I won't
Okay.
not move from this podium.
Brand's
This is my safe place, anyways. Okay,
Yeah.
go ahead.
So we see, we have clear instructions on what to do, and then a situation comes up, and it's super easy for us to go, well, God has put the answer right in front of me. It wasn't the answer I thought that he was giving me before, and so with no opportunity to evaluate if this is the right thing or not, I'm just going to jump forward and make this case. So when David sees Saul out there, he could have just been like, yeah, he has been delivered into my hand. I don't have to worry about this anymore. I can end this problem. I can step into my new role that I've already been anointed and named. And, as far as a military coup, that's it. If you kill the leader, you are now the leader. Here is the leader that's been trying to kill you. You have every opportunity, everything in front of you that says this is the easy way out, and it looks like this is the way I'm supposed to go. But he's also been specifically told not to do this. So that's kind of where mentally, as he's looking down before he cuts the robe, he's like, I could finish this. And that's what everybody's saying to him. Finish this. Be done. You have this opportunity out to deal with your bad leadership, to deal with, you don't have to be a follower in this anymore. You can become the leader if you'll just do this one thing. Just do this thing.
And it says the reason why he does not do this. In verse 24, 5, and 6, it says, after he did this, David was conscience-stricken for having cut off a corner of a robe. He said to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, or lay my hand on him, for he is the anointed of the Lord." So when I first read it, he was conscience-stricken for cutting off a piece of robe?
Yeah.
Like, man, like that is quite the connection and tender heart that he has. But what do we think is so powerful about this statement right here from David?
He understands not only God's command or instructions to him, but he understands God's timetable, that there will be a time for him, but this isn't it, even as convenient as it seems, and that he can pass by this, that God has a plan to bless him, but not right now. And if he does take Saul's life, then his kingship is tainted, and he won't be able to serve God like God wants him to be served. So I think it's a spiritual connection as well as a conscious moral decision. So I think he's more on a spiritual plane at this time thinking about this.
Right.
One of the things Daryl, like this is our connection to our sermon this morning when he talked about, sitting in the stillness, like not being necessarily active, being more contemplative and more in prayer and more connected with God than rather jumping out on our own. This is a moment where he easily could have stepped forward and done the thing, but instead he sat in the stillness with the directions and the way that God had instructed him. Do not do this. This is my anointed. Don't kill him. And so David had to kind of sit with that. And even though he didn't hurt Saul, it's, that it is a very, very, it's kind of a threat, especially like in what happens following right after like Saul leaves the cave.
Right. Yeah. So Saul leaves the cave and he walks out, and in valiant fashion, David comes out, and he says, "Hey." And so he says, "Why do you listen to the people who say I am trying to harm you?" And Saul is, kind of stricken at that point. And this is, why I think maybe demon, maybe it was mental illness that he was given as a, an evil spirit or whatever, but he's kind of like, David? And so I think this is interesting too, point, that you were making as following, God's will is, I think 2 points too, why I think that it was important that he didn't kill him. He had these, not only was he the anointed one, he was not king, but he was anointed. He had a group of people that were following him and watching him at that moment. I think he understood important how it was for him to not, do something evil in that side. And I forgot my second point. It was really good. It was my main one, actually. But also that he had such a relationship with Saul too as well. I think he understood, I grew up in this guy's house basically. Like he made me a squire. I think as he stood over him and he had Goliath's sword, as he was given for protection, easily he could have done the same thing that he did to Goliath, chopped his head off. But I think at that moment he also knew too that he had so much history that he had built up with this leader that it was hard for him just to go ahead and do that. And I think that is later illustrated too, like when he becomes king, he pardoned Saul's grandson, for treasonous acts that were very blatant. And so obviously he had, deep care for the man and thought that there was a better way, to go about this for multiple reasons.
Is this making
Man,
this-
I'm sorry.
It's me?
Okay, good.
Am I
All right.
don't know what I'm doing. Just stand like this.
Yeah.
This isn't awkward, is it?
No, not at all.
Okay. So there's a second sparing of Saul's life after this. Yeah, it's he gets turned in by one of the Ziphites that they just know where he's at. They get a hold of Saul's people, say, hey, this is where he's at this time. They set up camp on their, like, they're going to find David to kill him. They set up camp. David and one other guy sneak into the camp in the middle of the night, and it says God put a deep sleep over the entire army. So they just walk in, and they find Saul laying asleep in the middle of the... Is it really me? I don't know what I'm doing.
You just turn him down just a little bit. He can talk loud. You're a preacher's kid.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah, battery probably.
Oh, so they sneak in into the middle of the night, and they come to the camp. They see Saul sleeping with his spear, the spear of the king, stuck in the ground right beside him, and there's a jug of wine right beside him. And they look over him, and this guy that's with David is like, "This is it.
Mm-hmm.
This is your opportunity again. You can go ahead and end it here." And David once again says, "Nope, I can't do this. This isn't what I'm about." 1 Samuel 26, verses 10 and 11. David also said, as the Lord lives, the Lord certainly will strike him, or his day will come that he dies, or he will go into battle and perish. The Lord forbid that I would reach out with my hand against the Lord's anointed. But now please take the spear that at his head and the jug of water, and let's go. It's God's timing. It's God's timing. It's not mine. I know this is going to happen. He's not going to be here forever. I have to kind of deal with it as it is. I'm sure he hated that because it's not just like, I want to be in charge. It's like, hey, I would like to not be hunted down. It's just a higher degree of of what's on the line, what he's risking. Like if he ends it there, he becomes king. Nobody's hunting him anymore. But for a second time, he spares Saul's life.
Yeah. So I think there's several things we can bring from this story. One, and applying it to what we're talking about today, is that leaders can be dangerous in this world today, and it's not necessarily the ones like we're seeing with Saul the way that he was going about trying to kill. There's a lot of dangerous leaders that are guiding our thoughts and minds, a lot of times in ways that we don't blatantly see. And so, I think that's why it's cool, the way that 1 Samuel was written, because it really is a character study. We see two people here that are contrasted very much so. We see Saul, who had great flaws that were pride and doing things in such a way where integrity was totally out the window and evilness took over before he was actually given evil spirit. That was a choice that he made and that he did. David, on the other hand, we see a guy who is humble, a man after God's own heart, did not have any of the physical attributes other than being very good looking, probably, what it says, but not in such a way that a king of the time would probably look. But we realize that God doesn't really care about that at all. He didn't come from a name or anything. He was just a shepherd's boy. And so we're seeing this stark parallel here that we can apply to us. What are the flaws that we have in our lives? What are the flaws that we see maybe in leaders of who we'd like to follow? And what do we do about it? Saul didn't do anything about it. David did do something about it. And most importantly of what you mentioned and what you mentioned is that he could have taken this into his own hands. How many times do I want to take something into my own hands when I'm dealing with somebody that is trying to control my thoughts, actions, and taking all ownership away from me of an idea or a thought? Oh, yeah. It's pretty, man, I want to rise up and not have a part of it. And this is a time where David had multiple opportunities to do such. He did not at all. He stopped, waited, which we talked about a few weeks ago, and said, I'm going to do this whenever it is God's timing, and I'm going to trust that God will handle this of how he wants. So that is our talk on that part, and so that is a historical lesson that we can learn. But now let's transition that into today's world and how we deal with leaders today. Because I think what we just talked about, we do have some that probably are not ones that we would categorize as being in the area of David in our lives. And so what do we do about that? Where do we look?
So we're going to kind of deal in this next section, and I want as much input as possible because I want us to get our thoughts and feelings out because this one's a hurtful one. And we read this actually a few weeks ago, but we're going to kind of sit in this for a second. This is Romans chapter 13. If you guys want to turn there, we're going to read this. Romans chapter 13. It's just verses 1 through 7, and I'll give you guys a second if you want to open your Bible or phone, or I wonder if you could get it on Google Glass.
I don't even know what that is. I should.
It's
I'm
just
the
like
deacon of AV.
They're glasses that like you can do internet
I'm sure.
searches. It's just like Siri. So
Buy some, we'll try them.
yeah, okay. I think it's a matter of finding at this point. Is everybody there? That was time killing. So verse 1 says, every person is to be subject to governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those which exist are established by God. Therefore, whoever resists authority has opposed the ordinance of God, and they who have opposed will receive condemnation upon themselves. For rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil. Do you want to have no fear of authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For it is a servant of God to you for good. But if you do what is evil, be afraid, for it does not bear the sword for nothing. For it is a servant of God, an avenger who brings wrath on the one who practices evil. Therefore, it is necessary to be in subjugation, not only because of wrath, but also for the sake of conscience. For because of this, you also pay taxes, for rulers are servants of God, devoting themselves to this very thing. Pay to all what is due to them, tax to whom tax is due, custom to whom custom, respect to whom respect, and honor to whom honor. What do you think of that? What do you think of that? I guess it didn't come
It's a big question.
It is a big question. Yes, sir.
There's nobody speaking up.
Good. Yep.
That clearly is a very convicting set of verses concerning our social media habits, and whether it's Twitter or Facebook or any other social media where opinions are expressed about whether national leadership, local leadership, any leadership. I think you guys mentioned already this morning that you can post your opinion just about on anything without any consequences. Well, that's not entirely true because of what you just read.
Right. Yeah.
So there's responsibility in what you tweet and what you post, and in light of what you just read, and as Christians, we need to take that to heart so that we don't fall victim to disobedience to the Scripture.
Yes, Jamie.
Adding to what Alan was saying, I think it's interesting in Romans, just before 13 starts and then the end of 13
Yeah.
are both sections on love.
Yeah.
Love before, love after, and I suspect that's probably intentional, or at least if it's not intentional, it certainly speaks to us in our generation, because that first part of 13 is about politics, or government, or whatever it is that draws us down dark roads. Love before, love after. Love remains our primary focus, our primary call.
That's good.
Because we use that like a lot, oh, sorry, we use that like a lot of time, like we throw that verse out there, and contextually though, like seeing where it comes of how he's saying, here's how you interact with these people now. I think a lot of times we pull that out right there, and we're like, look, see? And I'm glad that you mentioned that, I forgot about that point. Two of them back there.
Larry was first.
Okay. I'll say two things. One is that the type of government they were living under was very authoritarian, and the people, the Christians, had no influence directly or indirectly into who was ruling. Paul wrote it to Romans. He also wrote it to Titus, who was living in a different part of the Roman Empire. Peter also wrote a similar thing in 1 Peter 2 to be subject. So you've got them under a system of government that they have no influence on, similar to what you were using with Saul and David in the kingdom. We live in a completely different system of government. So from that standpoint, we do have some influence, and we have the ability to vote.
Yes.
But that does not mean that our vote is going to be in the majority. So when we're in the minority, we are still under the obligation to obey, even if we don't agree, to be submissive. That's hard.
Real hard.
That's real hard. And we're also under an obligation to love our neighbors and love our enemies and to behave like that. And that's hard.
Agreed.
Because he wrote this, because was Nero, was he in charge at the time? Not yet? Close? Peter, right, Peter, it wasn't Peter, was,
Paul wrote this
yeah.
about 9 years before. The emperor at that time had exiled the majority of the Jewish Christians because of their uneasiness within the church, and they were troublemakers. And because of that now, Paul's writing this a few years later saying, look, we need peace in the church because the cause of Christ is more important than some government official edict that he hands down.
Right.
Or some tax that comes in. It's immaterial compared to the kingdom of God. And Paul's trying to get the church in Rome at this time focused because there's some really serious hard times coming up with Nero.
Yes.
And if they're not prepared now to handle that, how are they going to handle it then?
Cool, thanks. I forgot where that fell on that line.
Yes.
It's kind of a cryptic passage in Jude, but he warns people not to reject authority and speak evil of dignitaries and speak evil of things, of matters you may not completely understand. And even brings up how Michael was arguing with the devil and would not even bring a reproach against the devil. Now, if we're not supposed to talk evil, about the devil, perhaps, I mean, we know where he's coming from and we know he's evil, but it's kind of a huge reminder that we just don't talk evil about people. Whether, maybe we know they're evil, but we don't need to go around spreading, information that may not be 100% correct.
One of the other things with that is if all authority is appointed by God, okay, all authority all time, if all government rulers are appointed by God, then you may go, well, that can't possibly be because I've seen some of them. However, consider this. If you are appointed as a leader from God and you do not fulfill your role in a godly way, then what David said about Saul, I know God's going to take care of them. However it comes down, his reign will end, and then and God will take care of that, okay? So all of these people that we look at now and say they're terrible people in authority, whatever, they're still there appointed by God, whether they're doing their job as God intended to them, intended for them to do is a completely different matter. Yes.
I know this is a little off topic, but I was just gonna say, even in the end times, the authority is appointed by God, but that's meant to happen. I'm not saying it's good, but it's still meant to happen because it's in the Bible. So even that authority is appointed by God. So people, so you just gotta work on yourself.
That's right.
Great
Yeah.
point.
Be a good person.
That's right.
Great point.
It is up to the individual to make the correct decision,
Yeah.
even when authority above them is not doing what God had intended for us to do.
Could you think, how could, oh,
No, that's good.
that's a great point. That's a great point. Work on ourselves, yeah. Because you think, well, if there's these people that are so evil, how could have God put them there?
Right.
Like how could a Nero, one of the worst of all time, a Hitler, even people in, presidents in our own country, are like, these are just really, really bad men. How could they have been allowed in place to be there? I was piggybacking off of yours. That's a great point. It's not our job. God purposely put some of these terrible kings to be rulers of Israel at the time.
If you go through the early stages of kingness post David, it is a roller coaster of good and bad, and there are a number of them that it just like it. You don't want to be the person that was mentioned in the Bible that just says he was a bad king or he was a bad ruler. Like, hey, that's my sentence. I made one sentence in the Bible, and it just said I was real bad at this job. But they're in there. These are heirs being passed down along the line, and they're very in the line of David, and they're still there. They're still bad. Mm-hmm. The people still had to deal with it.
Yeah, and just in our own story here, God knew that Saul wasn't going to work out. Mm-hmm. But he tells Samuel, he said, go find this guy. It all drives the story, the narrative of the story of Israel into needing a real king, a real messianic king that they thought that they were going to get here on this earth, but they didn't. And every time they fail, it moves us one step closer to where we are today, and then it's just up to us to act in love and deal with you. Do you have anything else you wanted to talk about authorities
No,
there?
I think that we completely derailed what we have written.
Okay.
And so we've...
That's good. That was
no,
great
this was-
comments and points. I like hearing what everybody has to say because it really enlightens me a whole lot.
They're
Because I
smarter
need
than
a
we
lot
are.
of enlightening. Yeah.
Yeah, they're smarter than we are.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, just some points really to chew on as we go forward this week. It's really, I know we live in some times that are uncertain. We know our certainty, but as far as being on this earth, I know that there's some things that are uncertain for us as Christians. There's parts of this passage we read down here in 7, give to everyone what you owe them. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. Revenue, respect, then respect. If honor, then honor. Things like taxes, of well, where's my tax money going? What if I don't agree with that? It's all these things I think we really have to wrestle with that they did too, but it seems even more now so, maybe a little more, personal to us. And so what do we do those things? There's a lot of chewing. I'm glad Daryl talked about today of find a verse and really just chew on those 6-7 verses and let them speak to you. And this is one in this day and age that I probably need to chew on a little bit too, because I think it's all some uncertain times, and most importantly though, it's how we handle them, how we react, and how we carry ourselves to further the mission.
Yep.
So
I think that's all that we have for this morning. It is.
It is time.
Well, does anybody have any more thoughts or on this? I promise next week's going to be, it'll be a much better class all around, just because it's going to be just Brandon.
No.
Yes, sir.
He's leaving me.
I think sometimes we spend a lot of time thinking of things like government on a grand scale, and we worry about people above us doing what's correct. But by the end of the day, I think really what matters is the things on the small scale. Does your neighbor have what they need? Does the person in front of you know Jesus? Because when we learn to serve God in the small, I think it allows room for the great. And ultimately, as Christians right now, I think we're in a place that's pretty hard because we don't necessarily believe in our leaders. But I really feel like that's a distraction from serving your neighbor.
Yes.
And I think if we can teach the person next to us to love Jesus, it's going to spread, and that's what's going to create change. And I think we've been deceived in the sense of, let's rely on somebody so far away from us to correct what's right next to us. And it's not the time to correct them. But if you learn to love your neighbor, I don't think it's going to be hard to love Biden either.
Do you know how much I have to agree with my neighbor to love them? Zero. There can be people, I don't mean on the other side of the political aisle for the United States. I'm talking about like very different, like if you have Muslim neighbors, do you know how hard it is to love them? It's not. You don't have to agree to love somebody. That's it. Our job in followership is to work together as a group and move together. Yes, Tim.
Essentially, like, so 13, Romans 13, you take that a little more applicable to us, as we don't have a king or whatever, we just issue edicts. And that is to just follow the law, like, don't be a criminal and pay your taxes, essentially is what it can come down to. But also, man, I'm losing my train of thought now. Dang it, I hate it when that happens.
Do that regularly.
Oh, that's what it was. So leaders. Sorry. It's my opinion, my view, when I'm reading stories like that of terrible leaders in the Bible, especially through Israel stuff, that those bad leaders are either brought about to punish the people, to punish the Israelites, or to wake them up, to bring them back to God, because that's the ultimate goal anyway. Is to get them to realize that they've gone far, they've strayed from God, they've strayed from the first love, and they are depending on people, just like when they wanted Saul. We want a king, we want a king, we want a king, and God's like, I am your king.
Yes.
What's your problem?
Yes.
You don't need a king. No, we want a king. We want someone physically that we can worship, basically. So God's like, okay, here you go. And they were punished for it. They had a terrible king.
Until Jesus. Like,
Yeah.
really, like,
Exactly.
at that point until Jesus.
It's my belief and observation that basically this is a never-ending repetitive cycle. We have Jesus as our king, and the more we clamor for the physical king to latch onto, the more trouble we're going to experience and terrible leaders we're going to have.
Correct.
Because we need to be woken up to see how bad things can be when we delete God, like we have from this country. Yeah,
Agreed.
that was my thought.
That's awesome. Getting
I think we're having kids swarm in, so we've got to.
I'm supposed to get one too. So anyways, sorry for running, or thanks for coming. Sorry we ran over. Appreciate you all. Have a great week.
We'll see you next week.
Yep.